Let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Reardon, president of Connecticut Audubon Society, and I'm welcome you to this evening's community program. As always, we would like to honor the indigenous communities native to the chapter area, including the Pagusset, Wepawag, Quinnipiac, Tutucket, Minunketuk, and Hammonasset people. As we advocate for conservation of the land and its wildlife, we're indebted to the work of Native and indigenous people who cherished the land for thousands of years before European colonization. Let me just tell you about the upcoming events we have. Tuesday, February 7th, we'll have members night with members photos, a bird quiz, and much more. Saturday, February 18th, we've got a field trip to Chappaug Dam to see the eagles there. And on Wednesday, February 22nd, Robin Latousseur will tell us about the birds of Maine Islands. All of these programs require registration. The community programs for the Zoom link and the Chappaug Dam, because the number is limited. So check out the registration on the website under the calendar. Robert LaFrance, tonight's speaker, had a long career as Director of Governmental Affairs for DEEP, and brings a broad understanding of environmental law, science, policy, and a long relationship with legislators to advocate for Audubon's legislative priorities. If you have a question during the presentation, please put it in the chat and Rob will answer it at the end, or at the end you can raise your hand in the reactions and be called upon. Rob, it's all yours. Welcome. And one last thing, I would ask everybody who is not Rob to mute yourself. Everybody who's not Rob, mute yourself. So Rob, unmute yourself.
You got me on that, Dennis. It's been a whole one. I need to remember when to mute and when to not mute. So thank you for catching me on that. I just wanted to thank everybody tonight for coming and listening to what I have to say about what's happening up at the Capitol. What I hope to do is to give a little bit of a broad base of sort of general, sort of setting the table, if you will, about what happens and what work goes on at the General Assembly in Hartford. Give folks a little bit of an insight as to how to access members of the General Assembly and talk a little bit about process. And then I'm probably going to dig into some of the different bills that are up in front of the General Assembly this year and talk in some greater detail about those particular bills and proposals. The way I want to start off, though, is I want to remind folks that you are part of state government, and as an advocate for birds and for the places that they live and for Audubon generally, it's important that you know who your members of the General Assembly are. It's important that you know who your state representative is and who your state senator is. And to the extent that you know who they are, it's important that you know their phone number and feel comfortable sending them an email or sending them a text message or giving them a call. Generally speaking, most members of the General Assembly are very interested in hearing what you have to say. And as they work up the chain of leadership at the General Assembly, they become even more interested in their constituents because they want to stay working at the General Assembly. So let's just do a quick review of sort of, generally what's going on. Let me see why I get this going to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So what's new, right? Who's in, who's out, what's happening up at the Capitol? I think folks are aware of the fact that for the most part, many of our Democratic leadership was returned to the state government, Governor Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz and Attorney General Tong all got reelected. We have a new controller in Sean Scanlon, and a new treasurer Russell, and a new Secretary of the State Thomas. President pro tem of the Senate Marty Looney retained his position, as did Senator Duff from Norwalk as the majority leader. Senator Kelly from Stratford retained his position as Republican leader, and Matt Ritter and Jason Rojas retained their seats, as did Vin Candeloro retained the Republican seat in the House. We have had a new change at the Environment Committee. We have a new state senator who is now the chair of the committee, a gentleman by the name of Rick Lopes from the New Britain area. He replaced Christine Cohen from Madison, Guilford, and Killingworth. And we also have Joe Gresco from Stratford, who's returned as the co-chair of the House. We have a new ranking member, Craig Minor, retired from the General Assembly, and we have a new ranking member by the name of Senator Stephen Harding. Steve Harding basically took Craig's Senate seat, and that left open his old House ranking membership. We now have Representative Callahan from the northwest portion of the state, who's moved in as well. I'll focus on the Environment Committee, but we also have new leadership in the Energy and Technology Committee, as well as on the Planning and Development Committee. Folks probably know that the DEP commissioner was renominated to her position by Governor Lamont. She recently had a confirmation hearing, and her nomination will now go to the General Assembly for confirmation. And recently, Betsy Wingfield, who was the former deputy commissioner, retired, and we have a new acting bureau chief, formerly the bureau chief for air quality, is now Tracy Babbage, and she's acting as the deputy commissioner. All important to know, because you have to deal with both sides of the General Assembly as well as the administration as you try and get legislation passed. Clearly, you need to have a vote of the General Assembly to pass a bill. Both House and Senate have to pass it, but then the governor needs to sign it. So making certain that you have communication with both the House, Senate, and leadership of the administration is really important to being successful in this business. Update in terms of what's happening at the Capitol. We've been through the whole COVID-19 issue, and for a number of years, the Capitol was closed, and recently it's now open. Different committee rooms have closed themselves to public access, but that seems to be opening up a little bit more. Different committees are sort of dealing with it differently. My expectation is this year we're going to have something along the line of a hybrid session, where folks will be able to come up and see their members of the General Assembly, go to committee meetings, go to public hearings, but there'll also be a hybrid vote where folks can join by Zoom. So we expect to see that to happen as well. And now a little bit more of the sort of structure of the General Assembly in terms of the calendar. This is a long session, and in a long session, the governor presents a biennial budget, which basically is the budget that he puts forward for 2 years. That long session allows many members to put in what they call proposed bills, or bills that they think are important policy recommendations for the state of Connecticut. And the governor is responsible for setting off the appropriations process by introducing his 2-year budget. And that will come out in a budget address. I believe it's scheduled now for the 8th of February. It's a Wednesday in February, but it could be extended if he has any difficulty pulling together facts and figures for the budget. That has happened in the past, but currently I believe it will be on the 8th. So folks will probably see it on TV, probably worth listening in to hear what the governor has to say in terms of the budget. So I work at National Audubon Society, Connecticut chapter, and what we're looking at this session from a budget perspective, following up on what I just mentioned about the governor's issue, is we tried to get something passed, and I appreciate all the help I've gotten from Anunketuk and many other folks, so I'm sure on this call, we tried to get something passed this year called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act at the federal level. Unfortunately, that did not pass. It would have given the agency, the DEP, anywhere between $7 and $10 million a year to do important wildlife work. But since that didn't pass, we're going to have to advocate for more funds for the environmental conservation branch of the department in order to get things accomplished the way we want them to happen in order to help bird conservation. And those those portions of the environmental conservation branch include the wildlife division, the forestry division, and the fisheries division, both marine and inland. Last year, we were successful in getting additional law enforcement funding to hire at least 5 and potentially 10 more law enforcement officers. And we need to continue to push on those issues as the state government has a significant surplus that we believe should be moved towards taking care of folks in the Environmental Protection Agency who've lost many, many, many people to retirements due to contractual issues that basically forced retirements as an incentive, and many people took advantage of those incentives. This year, different than most, the department's legislative package has not been released publicly. We're not exactly certain why that is. In years past, we would have had it in December. So as a result of that, we really don't know what the department is proposing. We anticipate many of those bills, as many of the governor's priorities bills, will be put out in the early portion of February, right around the 8th, whenever the governor's budget is introduced. Many of those pieces of legislation should also be presented to the General Assembly. So I'm holding up this little document here, and I don't know how many folks are going to be able to, there it is. That's the bulletin that you see right there. I'm just trying to give you a little sense of what happens on a day-to-day basis at the General Assembly. And if you ever get a chance to go up there, this is a key document that you need to pick up. It's printed. It's also available on the website of the General Assembly. And the bulletin sets out daily all of the different things that are happening at the General Assembly. It'll tell you when the Senate's going in session. It'll tell you when the House is going in session. At the back of the book, it'll give you all the members and what committees they're on. It'll identify public hearings and meetings and basically tell you what's going on in terms of where things are happening and how things are happening. So what happens at the General Assembly is driven by the rules of the General Assembly, and the rules of the General Assembly effectively set out a bunch of different committees, and those committees have issues of cognizance, and they receive bills that are put forward by different members of the General Assembly. Each one of these committees are classified as either A or B committees, and if you're an A committee, you meet on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and if you're a B committee, you meet on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And in essence, all of these committees have to do their work, which is to raise bills or introduce bills, have public hearings on them, and then decide whether or not they want to move those bills back to the floor. That's called a JF, or joint favorable report, that they will then pass along to the full General Assembly. Here's a list of the joint rules, and I'm showing you all the different committees that exist within the General Assembly, everything from aging to appropriations to judiciary. But our focus is typically on environment, energy and technology, and planning and development. Some key deadlines that you see in basically in line 8, and maybe folks can't see that right now, but anyways, those are what they call the JF deadlines. And I will share this PowerPoint with folks after the meeting. The JF deadlines are the dates by which the committees have to have their work done. So the governor will introduce his budget in February, and the Appropriations Committee has a deadline, as you can see here, of April 21st to decide whether they want to change the governor's budget or go with the governor's budget in its entirety. And they have to report out all of their bills, which is the budget, by April 21st. So that's sort of the big sieve, if you will, of bills coming in, being heard, public hearings move forward, public hearings then move to committee meetings where committee has a votes to decide whether to jointly favorably report a bill. And once those bills are reported, they move to the House or Senate. We have what they call joint committees. The House and Senate are both on the same committee. And those combined joint favorable reports go back to the committee, go back to the chamber where they started from, and they have to pass both the House and the Senate in identical form before they can move on to the governor. So again, like I said before, I will share this information with folks later as a PDF. What's coming up? Already we have, and this is probably one of the earliest dates we've ever seen, we have an Environment Committee meeting already started out. So what does that mean for folks who might be interested in advocating? because we have these combined virtual, combined virtual and in-person opportunities. If you want to speak at a public hearing, you have to follow the rules here about when you can and can't do these things. The public hearing, this particular public hearing, will be on Monday. It's going to be live on YouTube. You can click on this and do your online registration form where you can register to speak, and your name will go into a hat. You need to make certain you do that by 3 p.m. the day before the General Assembly has a meeting. So, for example, in this particular case, if you wanted to testify either virtually or in person, you need to make certain that you have filed your name by 3 p.m. the day before, which in this particular case would be a Sunday. You can also put on, if you want, you can put written testimony in, and there's an online provision for you to do that as well. So what are we going to hear on the first day of the Environment Committee? Some of the issues that we're talking about here. So a few weeks ago, the committee held a hearing where they decided they were going to bring up certain bills that they wanted to hear from the public on. And I've identified a few of them here that might be of interest for folks in this group, and I'm happy to chat about them some more afterwards. But what you have here is, for example, an act concerning the replanting of trees in public areas run by the utility companies. Another one is, actions concerning the functions of the department. An act concerning tree removal. If folks remember, there was a bill last year, and this is a rehash of the same bill because of the tree cutting that went on in the northwest portion of the state. An act concerning the public capacity of state parks. An act concerning climate resiliency funds. You can read all of them along, and I'm going to go into a little bit more of them in detail a little bit further on. But these are all the committee. This is a public hearing, and if you're interested in testifying on this, either in written form or in person, you need to register on the committee's website or submit your testimony in person. And I would also say, to the extent that you know who your state senator or representative is, if you're filing testimony, it probably does make sense to CC your state legislator so they know you filed stuff because you're their constituent. The other thing that happened recently was there was a committee meeting, and I wanted to let folks know, because I think some folks were interested in some of these particular concepts from what Dennis had set out in terms of discussion tonight. For example, the committee decided that they were going to raise some bills on a couple of issues that we're talking about. One is the use of certain rodenticides, and those rodenticides are second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. I believe that's what the committee will end up putting forward. And what the form of that is and what it actually does is unclear at this time until we see the language of the bill. But many folks know that there have been some real problems with raptors and them ingesting rodents that have eaten these rodenticides, and them having significant physical ailments as a result of the ingesting of those rodents. So the proposal, I believe, is to ban those rodenticides, but we won't know that for a fact until we actually see that. Another bill that I anticipate coming back is an act concerning lighting of certain state-owned buildings for the protection of birds. We know what that committee bill was last year, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in my further slides. Another bill that's coming up here, which I think folks may be interested in, is this issue of photovoltaic solar arrays and how those might or might not be regulated. So we'll see some more information on that. All of the bills that are provided here will eventually become raised, and they will be available with statutory language for folks to testify on. Okay, that's where I'm at in terms of procedure. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about policy options and things that we're seeking to advocate for this year. So one of the things that Audubon Connecticut did was we put in a proposed bill. We put in a request for the committee to raise a bill. And this is a bill that we're seeking to raise having to do with protection of seabirds and shorebirds in coastal areas. As folks know, we work with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Audubon Alliance to put string fencing around areas we know to be places where piping plovers and other shorebirds come to nest and fledge, and hopefully grow up and fly off to Bermuda where they can do it all over again. We've had some real difficulty in this particular area with conflicts with human beings, whether it be humans themselves getting too close to these nesting areas, whether that be on bicycles, a whole bunch of different problems that we've had with conflict. I'll show you a few photos in a second. This bill would seek to give greater enforcement authority, something called an infraction, to law enforcement. So when they see these types of activities, they can just issue somebody a ticket. They don't have to go through a whole long, lengthier process of doing like a summons and complaint. They can just issue a ticket. And our hope is that will raise people's awareness of the issues surrounding these shore and seabirds and protect them in a greater way. We need to reduce the problems with human interaction. Let me just show you a couple quick photos. I mean, this is what we're dealing with, right? This is at Hammonasset. You've got all these people. There's shorebird nesting area right there, and people are kind of going up and down, not necessarily paying attention to what they need to do. Here's a guy on one of these new electric bikes, you can see with his fishing gear, riding awful close to an area that should be protected for birds. And these are the kinds of activities we'd like to have law enforcement be able to ticket and say you can't do. Some maybe more notorious issues here. We've got folks on ATVs running awful close on Milford Point. You can take a look at what we see here in terms of some of the bicycles and other paths that people have done on the left side there. And then we have the problem sometimes at nighttime. People aren't even seeing these string fencing, and they're going through with beer kegs and heading off to the beach for the evening to do what they're going to do, and potentially going right through some string fencing. So we think this is an area that we'd like to see a bill raised, and hopefully everybody here can help us support something like that to raise awareness of piping plovers and the protection they need during the seasonal time that they come here to breed, to lay their eggs, and to get to grow and fly back to their winter habitat. What other priorities do we have this year? Some of the things we're talking about in terms of we have a community conservation policy initiatives. What we're trying to do is we've been working with members of the General Assembly to support environmental justice. We've been doing things to help make certain that people can continue to have open space and access to the beaches in Connecticut. And we also want to protect vulnerable communities by making certain we do a good job in the urban forestry realm. And those are a number of bills that we'll be supporting, or policies that we'll be supporting as they come through the Environment Committee. Fortunately, we were able to get our bill raised, and I want to give a shout out to the Connecticut Ornithological Association and other folks who've been working on the Lights Out initiative. The Lights Out initiative is an initiative that's looking to try and get state buildings to turn off lights during migratory periods. We had a public hearing on it last year. It was generally well received, but did not get out of the committee. So we're going to have to take a little bit more look at that. And the Lights Out group has been working on this with many folks to try and get a greater grassroots effort out there to educate legislators about the importance of this. Our hope potentially, as well, is maybe to add some bird-friendly glass language to this bill. We'll see how it goes in the process, see what kind of response we've gotten. We've done some reach out to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection on bird-friendly glass, and our hope is that we can get maybe a little bit more traction on that as part of this bill. Other things that have been before, I mentioned this quickly earlier on the rodenticide. That bill will be reintroduced. I'm not exactly certain what that's going to look like. And similarly on an environmental justice bill, which we think will be more aggressive than some of the bills that we've seen in the past. One of the issues that, because we have not yet seen the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection bills yet, we don't know exactly what's going to be involved in them. But I think folks have heard there's a pretty big controversy around bears and the feeding of bears and the habituation of bears and the potential for a bear hunt. My expectation is that there will be some bills that are coming out potentially from the department where there may be a limitation on feeding a bird, of allowing any kind of feeding where bears might be impacted by that. So bird feeders in certain areas may be prohibited if there are bears in those areas where the bears are problematic, where they may be dangerous bears. There is also a proposal or potential for a proposal for a limited bear hunt in Litchfield County. I believe this will be a very controversial issue. And I know many folks are concerned about that. I'm happy to have a discussion about that as we end our conversation this evening. On the forest side of things, there will be a number of bills that are out there. The last session, there was a climate resilience fund that was established. And as a result of that, Audubon and other folks perhaps on this call have been applying for some grants that are being put forward by the Department of Agriculture. But there's a bill out now to talk about the no net loss to forests and other elements of a forest policy. And our forest folks are working that. As you can see, we have this guide here, Managing Forests and Trees for Birds in Connecticut, and we'll continue to work in that space to get policies and bills passed that will help do that. A couple of bills that I understand will be reintroduced. One of them we've already seen. Actually, both of these are now on the agenda and will be up for public hearing. One is an act concerning tree removal on properties under the Department of Energy and Environmental Control. This is a picture you can see. This is the state park up in Sharon, Connecticut, where a unfortunate tree cut was done. And there has still been some blowback from that, and this bill is asking for that to happen again. The agency did put together a formal they put together a formal policy on this, which is now available on their website. I'm not certain exactly where this will all go. We'll find out as we hear through the public hearing process. And another idea here is to create a municipal fund for tree planting, particularly, and again, there's some federal money made available, and that's going to maybe complicate this a little bit. But when utilities actually remove trees, making certain that trees are removed, are replanted when utility companies remove trees. I think there's also some interest in looking at the Department of Transportation and its tree cutting and how it works with replanting issues. I know the Forestry Division has often talked about right tree, right place. And that's something we'll probably hear more about as we get through the General Assembly this year. On the coast side, I think folks know that we have been advocating for coastal resilience and nature-based solutions at the federal level and at the state level. Fortunately, DEP last session came up with a new $10 million climate resilience fund, and we at Audubon, Connecticut, were fortunate to get we put in for some grants on that, and we were fortunate to get some money to create a coastal resilience hub in West Haven, Connecticut. And I want to thank Connecticut Audubon for helping be supportive of that and writing a letter for us. Much appreciated. There are some other bills that are here that also impact coast. One is the balloon bill, the prohibition on the release of helium balloons. That has been up many times in the General Assembly and never been able to get over the goal line. Mary Mashinsky, who's been a longtime supporter of this, hopes that this is finally the year. There's a coastal resilience funding bill, which will actually seek to get the treasurer involved in creating a coastal resilience funds for municipalities. And then a horseshoe crab bill, which we've seen in the past, and this year is coming back as a full, complete moratorium on horseshoe crab harvest in the state of Connecticut, including a prohibition on any take for bleeding purposes. Just a little bit more on the resilience fund. There was $10 million climate resilience fund that came out last year. The idea here is to leverage some state money against some of the programs that you see here that are federal programs. And those federal programs, the idea was to create some matching funds or some funds that could be used for planning to better access some of these funds. For example, these FEMA hazard mitigation funds are quite complicated and difficult to get. The idea was through the planning grants was to hopefully create an opportunity for not-for-profits to get some basic information and have that funded so they could do a better job of applying for some of these federal funds. I'll say to folks here tonight that we do need more folks in the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection actually working on these grants, reviewing these grants, and making sure the dollars get out. They are still woefully underfunded, and that's another area that they're underfunded in and lacks a certain level of personnel. Again, there are two tracks for this. One was planning, one's for project development. These have now closed. We don't know how many projects actually came in. We hope to hear more about that relatively soon. And once we hear about that, we'll be able to hopefully advocate for some additional funding for these types of grants. On climate, we are pretty active on the offshore wind. We've been pretty active in the offshore wind. I think folks know Corey Folsom O'Keefe from Audubon, Connecticut sits on something called the Commission on Environmental Standards, and we've been watching this. A lot of controversy happening now. Because of some expenses and increased costs, the projects that are out have been bid and won awards, are contemplating revisiting those awards with the state of Connecticut, and in so doing, they may have to take a penalty to walk away from the project, but may also decide that they want to kind of have a rebid for the offshore wind that we're thinking about doing. So we'll see where that plays out. I think maybe folks have read about that in the news, that some of the offshore wind industries, they don't feel they can build the projects for the contracted dollars that they have with the state of Connecticut. We'll see where that plays out. That's true in Massachusetts and other states as well. But what we're looking for here, and there's been a bill raised on this, to sort of solidify some of the membership on the offshore Commission on Environmental Standards, and to establish a compensatory mitigation fund. And that fund basically would make certain that if there are impacts to birds or mammals or to the ocean, that there be some compensation paid. It's similar to what we do in Connecticut, where we have the in lieu fee program, where people actually put money into a pot to help pay for the mitigation that they might have for any federal permits that they may get. That's pretty much where I was coming from. I was hoping to have a dialogue with folks, and I can stop my share and talk to folks about whatever issues are on your mind, and have a little bit of a dialogue about what's happening at the Capitol. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you to unmute yourself. No, can't be. Well, let me raise a question, Rob.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
What do you think the prospects are for the rodenticide situation?
So Senator Christine Cohen was a pretty staunch supporter of trying to make something happen in that regard. Unfortunately, it's a pretty complicated issue with regard to understanding the relationship between the federal government and the state government. The federal government, EPA, has not really done a good job in regulating this. And as a result of that, their lack of regulation, or their lack of leadership here, birds in Connecticut, particularly raptors, have been put at risk. My sense is there is not a good level of enforcement in the pesticides division because of lack of folks being involved. I think that folks are really interested in trying to deal with this issue, but the second generation anticoagulant rodenticide, for example, is supposed to be only put out in enclosures. But I've seen, and I think others have seen, people go to the hardware store and they buy this stuff and they just throw it out willy-nilly. So, getting a better handle on the control of it from an enforcement perspective, I think, is really important. Another thing is, and I don't know whether this will go anywhere, but there had been some talk about just creating a ban and having a moratorium on the material until better enforcement and better information can come out. It's not just raptors. I've heard this from folks in the department. It's not just raptors who are being impacted by this anticoagulant rodenticide. It's other mammals and other predators who are also being impacted by this. So I think there is some need for additional study to find out, number one, where it is, what's being impacted by it, and then moving forward to try and make certain it's more properly regulated, which means probably to do what they did in other situations where, in essence, rather than just you being able to buy it at the local area, you might have to have a pesticides license to be able to get this, and it might become a more heavily regulated issue. Last year, the bill basically created so many exceptions that the exceptions almost encompass the rule. So it'll be interesting to see how both the industry and folks in the advocacy community come together on this. And my sense is that there'll probably be something that gets passed. How strong it will be is unclear to me, but clearly there should be some money set aside at the General Assembly to do a better job of studying both the impacts of the pesticide themselves and understanding better how it's actually getting into the environment. So someone, I think, put something in the chat on horseshoe crab. Is that? Let me just
Yeah.
take a-
Yeah, it's from Donna. Donna Lorello.
Donna,
So
you wanna unmute yourself and ask your question?
I was just curious with the horseshoe crabs, if there is a moratorium passed where nobody can take them, what kind of monitoring is going to be out there to make sure people are abiding by that?
So the thing about right now, which is, I think, a fair assessment of what was happening in the past, there'd been a lot of reports of basically of poaching, right? Folks are, and part of the so to back up a little bit, last year the proposal was to do an all-out moratorium. That did not pass. The department passed some regulations which regulated the take, particularly during the new and full moon cycles, so that you couldn't go out during those time frames and take horseshoe crabs when they were coming in and they were, they were mating, right? So in essence, that's when many of the fishermen would come in and take these animals and harvest them and then use them for bait or use them for whatever other purposes they might be used for. That created and still creates some issue of poaching, right? So if there aren't guys, law enforcement officers at nighttime on those full moon cycles out there enforcing, that becomes a problem. So an all-out ban should simplify the fact that if you're being caught with a horseshoe crab, it's prohibited. You shouldn't have it. So it should make for a little bit easier enforcement. However, and folks have heard me talk about this in the past, we don't have nearly enough law enforcement from an environmental conservation perspective because we've expanded our parks in many ways. So the NCON officers are spending a lot of their time in the parks dealing with drunken disorderlies and other issues, domestic issues at the parks, and not really being able to do the kind of environmental conservation enforcement that's necessary. So it's kind of a dual sword, but I think it does simplify. An all-out ban would simplify the fact that if you're harvesting a horseshoe crab, it's illegal and you should be able to be ticketed or arrested pretty directly.
Thanks. Claire Matthews.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm interested in the lights out bill.
Great.
Who's raised it? What's in it? What are the possibilities of it moving forward?
So the bill was raised by the committee. In essence, there was a proposed bill that was put forward and the committee raised it, which that means is that I think Ann Hughes and a few others we can take a look at. If you go on the bill itself, you can see what members actually raised it. I think there were 4 members who raised it, who are actually put in as a proposed bill. They asked the committee to deal with it. So it was raised by the committee leadership, which means Joe Gresco and Rick Lopes, the 2 co-chairs of the Environment Committee, said this is a bill that's worth having a public hearing on. The bill, as I understand it, and we haven't seen the language of it this year, but the bill last year would have restricted the state of Connecticut buildings from operating they would have to limit their lights during 2 times of year. Basically, if you go back to my PowerPoint, you'll see them in there. But it's basically from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. The lights are supposed to be doused during the migration periods of spring and fall. The dates are in that, and those lights are supposed to be out during those time frames. As I indicated earlier, the hope might be to add an amendment to that bill during the process to also require any new construction or reconstruction to do bird-friendly glass. Some of the folks in the Lights Out program have also been very much aligned with that. And we know from some studies that have been done in Chicago that, you know, doing these types of lights out reductions can reduce bird collisions in those areas by as much as 80%.
So the bill was raised last year and it did not get out of the Environment Committee.
Correct.
And it is being raised again this year.
Correct.
Okay.
And over the last year, a number of folks have created this Lights Out organization, and they've been trying to reach out to municipalities and to talk to folks. They have a website called Lights Out Connecticut, and you know, they're trying to educate people and have been doing what they can do. My hope and expectation is that that group will come out in a pretty strong way and have a number of folks testify in favor of this proposal. It takes often more than a single year. If you remember, last year is what they call a short session. So this is the second time the Environment Committee is hearing about this bill. Last year, there was some pushback from state government. We've had some meetings with them over the course of the last year saying, listen, it's not really rocket science for you to do this. Can we count on your support? And we've gotten a little bit of a headway with it. Our hope is that the leadership in the governor's office, OPM, and other places, Department of Administrative Services, will lean on agencies to say, listen, this is not that difficult for you to do. Let's do it. It's important to set an example. And the other point is, I think in many ways, educating the public, and I'm hoping to get some public input on this, to educate people about those same ways to kind of turn the lights out on your own home or in your own property, is also something that the legislation can do, is to educate the population of Connecticut about the benefits of lights out.
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
You got it.
Related to that, Mary asked the question, what is stalling the lights out bill?
So my understanding last year was stalled because the Department of Administrative Services and a couple of other state agencies were taken by surprise that the bill was introduced. They really didn't have an understanding of what it meant. They got to leadership of the committee and said, listen, we need more time to figure this out. Over the course of the summer, we reached out to the Department of Administrative Services, asked them if they could be supportive, and I think we've gotten them at least to move forward. They do control a number of they're sort of the property managers for many properties. Other entities like Department of Corrections, University of Connecticut System, some of the others, we have not been able to connect with. But our hope is that, because the DAS is taking a positive attitude on this, that will be enough to get those other entities to agree. But that's part of the process of the General Assembly raising a bill. When those other entities, part of state government, see that, they'll weigh in and, we'll say, listen, we've been here again. It's time to move this bill. I see Carl has his hand up.
Could you provide us with a list of some key links that people would be able to go to get information about these bills? So that you'd actually be able to read what the contents of the bills are and then react to them, as we had discussed the other day.
Sure. So let me just say this, because it's relatively simple to do once you go to the General Assembly's website. So for example, if you go to the General Assembly's website and you click on that bulletin that I was showing before,
Yep.
it'll give you a list, and there are usually hyperlinks to each one of those bills. And if you click on a bill number, it'll actually give you something called the actually, let me see if I can't do it right now. I'll just run through. If folks want to see how to do it, it might be easier for me to just pull up the General Assembly's website and just run you through it so you can see how to do it. I'd rather, what's that they say, give a man a fish, have him go for a day, teach him how to fish, and he can live on forever, right? So let me see if I can't.
I'm just thinking of what I do with the federal legislation, going to the Congress.gov and bills and so forth, and follow that pattern.
Right. So in many ways, I mean, I do think it's, it's relatively simple to do that. Let me just bear with me a second. I just want to pull up a web link, and then I can share my screen. Okay. All right. Share screen. Share. Okay, so here's the General Assembly's website. It's pretty friendly if you think about it, right? So if you want to know on any particular day what's happening at that on the General Assembly, one of the things you can first do is you can take a look at something called session items. And if you go to the session items, the first thing that you're going to come up is or almost for the first thing, you're going to come up with the bulletin. And you click on the bulletin, and it's going to tell you what's happening every day up there. So if I click on January 26th for the bulletin, it's going to tell me what's happening at the General Assembly that day. And it's going to tell you what's happening for the rest of the time. It's going to tell you who all the leaders are. It's going to tell you the next time that the General Assembly is going to be in. So the House is going to be in on Wednesday, the February the 8th. Then it'll tell you what's happening on that particular day. Public Safety Committee meeting, Energy and Technology meeting, all of those other things are available. I'll explain how you get to that as well. The next thing they're going to do is they're going to talk about the committee meetings, where they're going to be and how you link to them. The YouTube live links, you can click on those and actually watch them. And then here you'll come down to the next thing, which is the committee meetings, right? So here's a public hearing that we're talking about, the Environment Committee. This particular one isn't going to have the hyperlinks, but you could take that Senate bill number and pop it in, and I'll show you where you do that in a second. But let's go back to the better way to do that if we're following something from the Environment Committee, for example. So I'm going to go back to committees, and this is probably the easiest way for folks who want to know what's happening. You now know there's going to be a public hearing because the bulletin has told you so. So I'm going to go to the Environment Committee. And when I go to the Environment Committee's section of the website, I'm going to be able to come here and take a look at a number of different things. I can see who the committee members are. And so here's a list of all the different members, who the chairs are, who the various members are. But I can also take a look at, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Went back too much. Go back here again, sorry. Environment Committee. And I can come over down here and I can scroll down to public hearing agendas. So I go to the agendas, and guess what? I know there's going to be a committee meeting on Monday, and I showed you the list earlier of what's going to be on that agenda. So here it is. Here's the agenda, as well as the links to how you register to speak, how to submit written testimony, as well as YouTube Live. So if I click on those, I'll be driven to those areas. But here, for example, we were talking about one of the things we were talking about was here's an act concerning balloons, right? Intentional release of balloons. So if you want to testify on this, you can see that this is the bill that was introduced by the Environment Committee. The text of the bill, so you can see what it says, is right here. And the text of the bill will tell you, the provision of this section shall not apply to any balloon developed. So in essence, this is saying that currently under current law, which is bracketed here, you used to be able to release, I think it was 10 balloons in a 24-hour period. Yeah, within 24 about 10 or more. So under current law, you're only allowed to release 10 balloons for a party. You couldn't do any more than that. This bill would do away from that. So the bracketed language says that take that out. And the added language says, this is how we're going to change it. The provisions of this section shall not apply to a balloon developed by the National Weather Service. So that's the bill. So in essence, you could read that bill and then decide what's going to happen with that. So just going back, this piece of information, this what they call bill status page, will show into the future all of the different actions that have happened. You can see here the bill was referred to the Joint Committee on the Environment, and then a public hearing was scheduled on it. You can add this to a list if you want to track bills yourself. You can track bills yourself, and the computer, this Connecticut General Assembly website will tell you when the next action is going to come forward. Let's go back to the public hearing agenda. And I just want to show you, whoops, back again. Public hearing agenda. So scrolling up, if I want to register to speak, I can click on this hyperlink and I can fill in my information in terms of registering to speak. If I want to just submit my testimony, submit my written testimony, I click on this link and it'll basically tell me my name, etc. And then I can put my information in and I can submit that to the General Assembly. I can make a PDF and attach it to this as well. And then finally, you can watch the committee hearing on YouTube Live, and you can actually participate in via YouTube Live once you actually have the opportunity to get in. And that's not a live, you can see here's the live feed where you would actually get into a Zoom type of situation where you would wait until you're called. Now, when you register for a General Assembly web, if you want to go in on a website, you basically are going to you're going to register for it, and then you're going to get a number. You could be number 1, you won the lottery. You could be number 352. Guess what? You're waiting around till 10 o'clock in the evening to get on that particular thing. What's unclear to me is how they're going to deal between people in person and people on the web. My sense is you're going to get a number and they're just going to go back and forth between the two. We'll see how that plays out this year. Anyway, that's sort of an overview of how you go about doing it. Down below here, let me back up a second. If you just happen to have a bill number, you can take a look at the bottom here. You can see there's a bill number. So if I knew my bill was, say, bill number 5221, I can just put that in and it's going to bring me to that bill. In that particular case, this is noise limits on wind facilities, environmental job creation. So this is another bill. So if I wanted to take a look at this, this would basically be a proposed bill, which only has a kind of quick description of what's going on, and I could read more about that bill. Until a proposed bill actually goes through gets raised by a committee, it's not going to go anywhere. So these are just the concepts that members put out in a long session. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. That's perfect.
Great.
And this is being recorded, and I'll send out the link for the recording tomorrow. So if you want to go back and review all that stuff that Rob just went through, you can look at the recording.
So just quickly, we have this bill 5376. Let me take a quick look on that. 5376. I'm just pulling it up on my web here. Okay, and Melissa Osborne from the 16th district has proposed a bill, and in her proposed bill, she says prohibit the feeding, placing, exposing, or depositing or scattering of metal material with the intention of feeding of attracting wildlife, including bears, deer, coyote, bobcats, fisher cats, and wild birds. Bird feeders from being used between April 1st and November 30th, inclusive each year, unless the source is recognized as not being desirable, but bears such as but not limited to certain types of Niger and thistle, an improper storage of food. So that's a proposed bill. That bill has not yet been raised by the committee. They could have if they wanted to have a public hearing just on the concept. Typically, the Environment Committee hasn't done business that way. They do have a new chair, but typically they would wait to raise a bill for a public hearing, and the language would be more specific than what this says. Having said that, that doesn't mean they couldn't move forward on this. This bill was, in fact, referred to the Committee on the Environment. So if the Committee on the Environment doesn't take action on this bill and raise it or deal with it within a certain of the timeframes that are happened, the bill will die in and of itself. My expectation is something perhaps a little bit more nuanced will be coming out in the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's proposal where it might be a little bit more limited to say, rather than just to all the things you see there, it might be for prohibiting certain, I think the notion that that wild birds as a general category would be an exclusion, I think would get some pretty hard pushback. But the idea of leaving some of the stuff out for bears, deers and coyotes, bobcats and fisher cats might have a better chance of actually getting some traction through the committee. My sense is that there's this nuance of particularly with bird feeders, that if you don't have bears in your area, why shouldn't you be able to put your bird feeder out? And even if you do have bears in your area, if the bear isn't coming near you or isn't a bear that's being habituated, and you're paying attention to it, that's that probably also something that shouldn't happen. My understanding is what the department was saying is if they found a bear in your area who's a habituated bear and who's had some, kind of becomes a dangerous bear, they might at that point in time look to restrict feeding in that particular municipality and perhaps in that limited area. But because we haven't seen the agency bills yet, hard to say what will actually be, formally proposed. Is that helpful? A little bit of like lack of information on my part to know what's actually going to be proposed.
Okay, going back to rodenticides and the relationship to animals. A ban on leg hold traps was not discussed yet.
So a ban on leg hold traps has been
They're
introduced.
also dangerous to
Birds.
raptors.
Right. So a ban on trapping has been in front of the General Assembly many times. There's an active trapping constituency, which my expectation will come out in pretty full force to say, based upon some sort of international standards for leg hold traps, that they are humane, and they will fight to prevent that from happening. So my sense is that will be if that happens, that will be a very controversial bill, and it'll be hard for me to predict how that would go. I can tell you in years past, that issue before we had Zoom would bring 300 to 500 people from the trapping community to the General Assembly to say they felt that was unreasonable, and that they do it for other valid purposes, including taking fur and preventing certain type of animals from becoming pests, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? All right, last thing, Rob. What
Yeah.
can we all do to help advance these proposals?
So I think, for example, on lights out, my sense is, and as soon as I see language on the bill, we'll probably be doing an action alert to raise awareness. I think that particular bill is one where awareness and raising awareness of that proposal is something that would be really helpful. I think there are other issues here that people may be interested in. For example, if folks feel passionately about the rodenticide, it's important that we'll send out probably an action alert about what we think should happen. But hopefully folks who are interested in these issues and are here tonight, keeping an eye on the bill, testify in person, give your legislator a call, whether they're on the committee or not. Establish a relationship with your local legislator, because that legislator will listen to what you have to say because you're a constituent of theirs. And if they don't know you're thinking about something, they're not going to be able to listen to it. They're going to listen to the people who reach out to them. If you're writing testimony, if you're taking the time to do it and submitting it to the Environment Committee, submit it as well to your state senator and to your own and to your house member as well. If you want to and have the time and you want to come up and talk to members of the General Assembly in and around a hearing, come up to the Capitol. I'll be up there oftentimes, and introduce yourself to me, and I can introduce you to someone at the Capitol who may be working on an issue that you are interested in. I'm happy to try and facilitate those conversations. What else can you do? Sometimes letters to the editor are helpful, right? If you feel that for example, if we get a bill out of committee, maybe you write a letter to the editor. Maybe you talk to your first selectman about the importance, how this particular bill could help your town. So for example, in the lights out situation, how the town might be better off if the town buildings were turned off, and how they could support state buildings being turned off, and how that has a beneficial impact on birds. Those are the kinds of things, those kind of networking connections is how the General Assembly works. And then after we move those things to the point where they're out and they're alive on the floor, at that point in time, we may have to go to the process of phoning or texting or putting some other pressure on. But my experience is members relate best to people who they know, who call or write them on issues specific to that particular district. That's what they respond best to. So if you know your state legislator, this is the time to become their best friend.
Thanks, Rob. And one last chance for questions. All right, thanks a lot, Rob, for your presentation tonight, and we'll see what we can do to get the legislative priorities enacted and
Great.
signed.
And I want to just thank everybody for taking the time this evening to listening to my talk. Dennis has my information. If you want to send me an email, happy to do it. And I'm happy to hear that this has been recorded, and hopefully I can help move a lot of these priorities forward. There's some good things I think we can do. I think we have a good committee. I think many of them are very committed to environmental protection and environmental conservation. And we just need to continue to connect with them and establish relationships with them. So thank you for the time.
This is a heads up,
Thank
Robert,
you.
for putting you on the schedule for next year.
Short session next year, Carl. So I'll have to go a little bit later. You have to put me in February next year.
Okay.
How's that?
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Okay.
Thank you.